This is my first view out my hostel room at Little Bucharest Old Town Hostel. This is the old town, which has all been pedestrianized. That is my hostel room. My bed on the right. And an impressive old looking building. The Bank of Credit, Roman. And then this Roman Orthodox Church, Romanian Orthodox Church. Pretty church. Great detail on it. We'll go up there a little bit closer and through it. And this is apparently another portion of it, but I'm guessing. I'm guessing very old paintings. Here the weathering has damaged these panels, of course. But if you look closely, you can see that the style is outlining the figures in black and then painting inside and blackening other main elements like the arm. Lovely carved entryway, and we'll take a closer look at this beautiful door, or set of doors. The relief of these columns. And a lovely inner courtyard, even for what I think is a newer building. With some lapidarium from who knows where. It certainly, to my eye, feels Moorish. And there is that design that I saw on the fort yesterday in Belgrade. And I wonder if these columns aren't from some prior building that stood where this, what looks like a newer building, once was. The style of this building, according to a nearby interpretive sign, seems to suggest that it's based on an earlier inn that was on this location. And that may be what these lapidarium monuments, if you will, are from. Although that large one looks like had to be from something far more robust than a mere inn. This looks oriental. An impressive structure, whatever it is. Signs out front seem to suggest, in my mind, that it's a bank, but I don't know if that's true. Must be pretty inside, if that is floor to ceiling, but I can't imagine it would be. I can't interpret all of the words, but the word economy is in there somewhere as a definition of what this building once was, but it is the CEC Bank. Perhaps all the buildings, as well as many within the old town, are of this monumental, august design and size. Notice the name of the architects up there. And down that street leads to my hostel. Here, a more modern Romanesque church. This is a Christian Orthodox church, I believe. And I'm not that knowledgeable to distinguish if there are more than one type of Christian church in this area. Playing off of Jovan's idea, the narrow building on the right, the darker one, may be an example of an older building because of its smallness or thinness. This is a building whose brass towers, or whatever you would call those, I can see from the hostel when I look out. It'd be interesting if I hadn't took the time to find out who this person was. In the midst of all this old, pretty modern building. Behind me is the BCR Bank building, and this is the Banque Nationale Romaniale, but that's also one of the large buildings I just looked at a few moments ago, so who knows. My hostel is down there, I think, just a, well, that's the doorway down there where that purple blob is. Interesting building. And panning all the way to its right, if I were standing in it, is this august building way down there, which we'll go down and take a look at. Ah, romance. I'm sure there's a name for this, what I think is 19th century over-the-top architecture. But I don't know it. It's got to have a name. It's distinct and over the top. That round building, which looks like the Capitol Records building in Hollywood, I think that's the name of it, is unique. Yet it's looking so tawdry. You wonder what it was like when it was new. And of course, here beside it is that frontal view of that pretty building we saw a moment ago. And here are a couple of smaller buildings, in particular that tiny building it looks like. It is impressive, but you wonder, as compared to the Roman equivalent, it was all solid rock, or mostly it was, whether this would all just peel off in a good earthquake. And I'll track along the top of the side of the building because it looks like it has interest value also. And then another building way down there, and only in gray. This is kind of what was probably a side street, or at least a relatively minor, and maybe even earlier, to some of these bigger constructs here that we've been looking at. And here is interesting, an intersection that seems to be a street that curves, and just makes me wonder what cow path a long time ago curved here. They give us a clue in that this church stands here, and it may have been the main focal point of a little village area, residential area. But also notice on that building there, those tall archways, like something stood in that place next to it. Interesting. This is interesting because it looks like three smaller buildings that may have existed at different times. Notice the one in the middle is being held up by some what look like logs, and the one at the back, the portion at the back. This is interesting because it has this dome that's like you find in churches and monasteries and so forth, but then it's this kind of an arcade. Was it originally such a place? Heavy iron windows and doors. It was certainly all of a piece at one time, as it is still. Wooden upper portion, it appears. Could it have been a caravanserai, or however you pronounce that? An inn in the old days? The lady tells me that here perhaps a government-required protection of this architectural structure. Pretty impressive support system for the facade, eh? It'd be nice to know what the age of this old, narrow building is. Here, a modest version, a modest-sized building with that same kind of impressive top that is allowed to deteriorate into rust. As the economy improves, perhaps it will be restored as our other buildings here and regain its old glory. There, of course, is that brass-topped building that I could see from my hostel, wherever my hostel. There, an interesting version of what we've seen before with that rich red color. Here's a pretty intersection, a nice intersection that shows the restoration going on to my right and restoration further down, as well as ongoing restoration and preservation of these older buildings. I suspect that at night this is one of those places that is alive. This is littered with restaurants and bars. The promise of a place like this in this status, this mixed status of old, decrepit, somewhat restored, sophisticatedly restored, is the promise of opportunity. And if I interpret this right, it's a consignment antique shop. Imagine this building when it was new. Before that tree had a chance to almost surround that corner. Imagine when the rest of the street were alive like it was when it was new. What are the sounds we would see? The clothes people would wear. So I've just wandered down through the subway to get my tickets for tomorrow and to figure out how to do all of that and to know where I'm going to go. People were very helpful in getting me to do that. Hostel's up there a little ways. This is the main corner that I orientate to, which is Unirii 2. There's my McDonald's. Of course, there's many McDonald's, but I hope I can distinguish this one. And so I'm going to just traverse through this park and just see what it's like. It's interesting. I was coming in the taxi with Irina and her mother, and she said, "What do you think of Bucharest?" Of course, I haven't seen anything but the airport and coming in on the street, which is about as ordinary as you can get. Just apartment house after apartment house after apartment house. And I've had others ask me the same question. The one perception I have is that it is a bustling city, but it's also an old city, and it's not well maintained. Why economically they don't maintain the capital like I would anticipate. So this looks like a big roundabout, in the center at least, and here an elaborate system of pools, and presumably there are even fountains here, but I don't see them. The pools are not filled. There, of course, in the center is a large fountain. So I saw a chunk of river up there, at least a body of water. My understanding is the river is over here somewhere, and maybe it runs underneath here, but that seems unbelievable that you do that. Over there is Old Town, and about straight through there somewhere should be my hostel. The city's characterized by these huge buildings. And you can see that the design continues way down there also towards the Samsung building. First I thought the sun was out. Pretty flowers. Up here I see a pretty grassy area up here, and I thought I'd take a closer look at it. Trolley turnaround. It's pretty whatever it is. Notice that building up on the left and that porch up on top. If that's a residence, wouldn't that be a pretty place to live if you had to live here? Certainly a church at the end. Don't know what that monument is. They have a strange kind of a system for crossing streets. There's a crosswalk up there, but not a light. So if you step into it, everybody slams their brakes on. In other places, like at the main intersection, there are crosswalks with lights. Elsewhere, you just hope that you can find a gap because you go for a long distance. I don't know where the next crosswalk is, looking way down there, but it's quite a ways. So you just go across and you stand in the middle. There's no place separating you. When you get scared bad enough, you just flag people and start walking through it, and they stop. So I'm just walking my way around that huge circle. Here we see companion buildings to the large ones across the street. This was designed as a nice area that would give a walkway on either side, plus the sidewalk I just came from in front of the businesses. Here there's 3 actually. This has been turned in right here into a bicycle path. But I think I'll walk down this way and come into Old Town from the far left. And you can imagine somebody building a building like that and then making this street that goes down to where we saw the large circular, what looked like they should have been pools, feature the magnificent street of triumph that you came down to get to the legislature. This old building was kind of interesting to look at. Notice the overhanging roof and the little balcony on the second floor. Next to this church. Well, the church itself from the outside is relatively uninteresting. It's interesting on this entryway, ceiling and walls are interesting and reasonably well maintained artwork. I wonder if the words above the doors similar to or the same words at the other church, or whether that's the spot perhaps where they describe why this church exists in the first place. Somebody once important. Not sure what that building is, but to the right should be that big pile of buildings that went alongside the road. But I'm going to cross this bridge here. It's fine. When this building was new, it was probably a pretty lovely place to live. Now behind me are large, what look like maybe apartment buildings, quasi-industrial buildings or commercial buildings. So this is the Radolci region sour soup, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly. And it's a classic Romanian sour soup with chicken meat flavored with fresh garlic and seasoned with vinegar and sour cream. And also they bring vinegar and oil so that I can add that if I like. And there are also whole onions in it. I'm walking from the metro station up, which is Victoria, on up to Aviator something. Saw this building. Had my first dog attack from some old fucker that was sleeping on a bench. And the dog came after me after I passed it. So I turned around to scare him off, and he'd run away and then come back. So I picked up a rock and I threw it at him. Then I had all hell going loose when the little one came after me. Normally in the world, if you just pick up a rock, that's enough to intimidate him. This one didn't quite get intimidated. So here we're at the beginning on the other side of the road of a very beautiful big park. So I think what I'll probably do is walk up here. There's an incredible home of the past. Who knows what it's used for now. But up here is I'll call it a country building museum. It's where they bring buildings in that are of historic value and reassemble them into a museum. And it's inside the big park up on my left. That word, even though it's in Romanian, seems to suggest that it's something to do with arrow. So I'm hoping I'm on the right track. Okay, so here's a map of the park, and what we've done, we came in down here, Charles de Gaulle, walked up through here, so probably somewhere about in here maybe, and then walked along and have come back, and we're about right here now, and I don't see any evidence of that park that I'm looking for, of historic building. This I'm pretty sure is a statue of de Gaulle, has this look about it. I don't know the connection with the French, but I do know there is a connection, since you can use merci as a way of saying thank you. It's a luxuriant park in the sense of greenery, and with benches that are new and frequent. And I suspect that maybe in the summer they actually put water in here, don't know. But it would be nice and pleasant. It's not a tourist-friendly town in the sense that even at their parks there's no English, so it doesn't care whether it responds to the interests of foreign travelers, most of whom speak English, as do many of the young, if not all of the young Romanians. And it could be that they're just too busy functioning. This is where we're at, and buried somewhere in this park is supposed to be that museum I'm looking for. So I'm just going to make a wide sweep circle on the interior in hopes that I run across that museum. On the other hand, they've done the right thing for their children, provided a very nice playground complex, and it looks like another one over there, and then this is a miniature golf course that we're walking alongside of. Something to entertain the parents, apparently. I don't know what Leonardo did here, but it's nice that he gets his kudos. Kind of an interesting statue. It appears to be a nun from the side, but holding, I'm sure it's not a sailboat, although it looks like it, but some symbology of that diamond and whatever it's resting on in her hand. And I'm guessing that that word is architecture. Here I've arrived at a very lovely lake, excuse me, with sailboats on it, which is kind of fun. It's a big enough lake for that. I'm guessing this is some cute little restaurant. There's a fair number of people on the bicycle path, although you don't see one now. And from over there, you can not only hire canoes or kayaks, you can see them in yellow there, but you can get on one of their little ferries or tour boats and cruise the lake, apparently. Miss the sailboats. That's pretty cool. It's a pretty nice place. It's windy and potentially rainy today, but in the summer and on a pretty day it must be a great refuge for the folks of Bucharest. You may think I make too great a point of that, but when you've been in other capitals where if you even find a seat, it's sometimes in complete ratty condition. And these are food kiosks. They're pretty in themselves. And here, a little bridge that we'll go over to exactly what I don't know. This is where we're at, and buried somewhere in this park is supposed to be that museum I'm looking for. The other side of the bridge is this monumental type garden. I don't know what its purpose is for. I think this pond here to the left side of the bridge is set off as kind of like a refuge for these birds. Some kind of goose. Okay, so here's a map of the park, and what we've done, we came in down here, Charles de Gaulle, walked up through here, so probably somewhere about in here maybe, and then walked along and have come back, and we're about right here now, and I don't see any evidence of that park that I'm looking for. Here another square, for lack of a better term. It's surrounded with a fountain pond with no water, surrounded by flowers that hopefully will come alive a little bit later in the spring. Make a grand circle about the inside of the park. So I have found the museum. Notice the old carousel. Now all I gotta do is find the way in. It's quite possible I'll be too late today, but at least I know where it is so I can come back and I can say that today was a lovely day going through the park. You can see lots of wide areas for bike riding and for walking, so it's an excellent park. So there's our main building that I enter in. A very beautiful tree. Look at that. Get a better look, hopefully. And so we've got till 7 o'clock to wander through this very extensive grounds. Whether anything will be in English is a good question. It's interesting how technologies, somewhat the same, evolve throughout the world over time, subject to the materials at hand, of course. And then, of course, styles evolve. Cute chicken and some other little critter. Oh, some rabbits, I think, are there, or something's there. No more chickens. And this is laid out so nicely you could almost imagine people lived here. Yikes, it is in English. How good is that? Still, we'll have to cherry pick because there's so much. This is actually a 20th century homestead, if you will. The barn, notice that two sides with an open area. Maybe cattle would hang out in there like that small one north of Jackson. What's particularly interesting about these places is that you know that people lived here. Families were created and raised here. Life lived here. If only it could speak. And maybe someday, like DNA, we'll have that technology. I don't know if this was typical or not, that you would have your kitchen and bedroom all in the same, but not unusual for the American wilderness. Probably a heating stove. Here's the kitchen. Modest, but for a woman who knows what she's doing, probably adequate. One would be amazed, I suspect, at what you could eat in this kitchen, and probably did. And here's the equivalent of what I saw in Spain so often, although put up on rock pillars, if you will, but a granary, place to put the grain and foodstuffs where critters couldn't get at it. Now, how they kept mice from climbing up in there, I don't know, unless it was the inner weaving that was so tight that kept them out. Picturesque well, probably for a community, but maybe for a large homestead, although small homesteads would have had something. There, another example. And again, you wonder, how did they keep the critters out? Here, this one seems to serve a dual purpose. Something could be put in below. An earlier church, perhaps similar to the kind that I'll see up in northern Romania. This is apparently where it came from, and its date. Notice, 3 years before our Declaration of Independence. There's probably the picture of it being dismantled. Yep. Look at the size of the timbers that it sits on. The lovely detail of those wood shingles that in themselves are individually carved out. But notice in particular how it curves down through that trough and over those little dormers. Could the man that built this in any way at all empathize with our Western log home builders? Here, I think a simpler form of coping, just square notches like Lincoln logs. But notice the detail. Are those individual pieces? I don't think so. I suspect those are design cuts in the wood. Imagine that somebody sat on this porch and watched their neighbors go about with an occasional quip between them all. And here a home built perhaps for cattle and so forth in the lower portion, and then the folks living up above. You wonder if that log was a supporting log or what its role was, and that such effort was taken to bring it here. Notice how they've created foundations that are of those very substantial logs, probably making the building quite secure sitting on those rocks, even if there are a couple of sleighs, whether they were used just in the wintertime or whether they were used because wheels were impractical for some reason at the time. A little bit more modern structure. I wonder if that's a street name and what the significance is of that design element. How cute is this building? And what would it have been for? Even has its own little porch. Nicely designed columns, if you will. This is a 19th century home. Look at how relatively modern it is for the 1800s. Probably the walls less expensive to build. We'll get a closer look at these in a moment when we walk through the front entranceway. But is that subterranean? You would think so. Yeah, so this was 19th century half-buried house, as they say, but look how it looks from the, if it were lit up well. Can you see the intricate design? I'll get a little closer. You wonder what the significance of that almost horse-like looking extension of that beam. This almost reminds you of our Native American. This is just an entryway. The rest of the house was further back in. We won't have access to that. But that had all the obvious benefits of any house built underground. Don't know what that structure is for. And here another. Not only that, it would be relatively easy to maintain the roof, and I'm not trying to be funny. So this looks like some kind of a water wheel, in that the water would come in here. Now maybe that whole thing pivoted out. I don't know. I can't tell. It doesn't really look like it did, but it looks like water would come in from somewhere and drop onto those things, causing them to move. I'm just guessing. Not first time I've ever seen that kind of a design. But this, I'm pretty sure, is that's a water wheel that provides the power off of a stream going through there. But then what these are devices that click on machinery that would sit out here a ways, causing a manufacturing multiple production capability. So depending upon where those are located as to the circumference of the log, as well as to right and left, would determine the frequency with which certain actions occurred relative to others. Damn clever for being made out of wood. That's what it is. It's a gold or mineral stamping machine. Interesting what the purpose of this little smaller rivulet of water would have been for coming down here, unless it was to pan the gold or mineral that had been beaten up by the machinery. That, I'm sure, is probably what it was. This would have been the tray, and it would have been corrugated somehow. I'm not sure I can decipher what this was for. Ah, wait. I think it may be, it's a clothes fulling machine. Brought in 1936 from Borklova. So all I've got to do is find out what a clothes fulling machine is. My guess is that it somehow treats fabric or the wool or whatever to make the fabric. Here it is. But again, what's actually happening? Certainly somewhere here, either right there or wherever water causes that shaft to rotate. Maybe we're further on, we'll figure out what took place here. You can see water being channeled down through there and down through there, perhaps performing two mechanical functions. Function being the washing function. This function perhaps being the spinning of that shaft. And looking at it from here, it's hard to tell what anything did. But now here's another couple of water sources, one coming in here and then another there. So there's 4 separate chunks of water being sent in here. Some may be for power, some may be for lubrication. But did these big things go up and down somehow? Now here's another one of those devices. But notice what we've got inside, wrapped around this center shaft is this spindle. Did it somehow work like a cotton gin on the fabric or whatever that was in here? I can't fathom it yet. Notice this is from the town of Sibiu, where I'll be going in the next few days. Notice that it appears that certainly there are two water wheels here, but maybe one is for that side, one is for that side. Does not appear that they had anything in common. Okay, here the shaft of the wheel and the basket are different. Here boards were used, so it's interesting. And in that last building, it does appear that those two buildings and those two shafts functioned somehow together. It's great that these kind of things are preserved. Here again, you see that kind of spindling, and you see those shafts coming out like that. Those would have been tripped by the board sticking out of the shaft itself. Now, what exactly they did on this side, other than perhaps to lift up each of these vertical shafts and pound it back down to the hole, I think that's the reality. See that one sticking partially out? Can you imagine working in here, the creaking and so forth of all that? And notice this big device here. I think if what I saw in Spain is any indicator, although there it was for grapes, this is somehow used to press whatever it is that they were working with. In that instance, grapes. Here it may have been clothes or the material used to make clothes. And this is something I've seen few of, if any, and that's a windmill. Little boys are such babies. I don't know if this is intended to be legitimate or not, but it's cute. Pretty house is 1898, so a little more than 100 years. But that's impressive to an American. How it has that same Muslim design, but using benches, if you will. It's not Muslim, that's for sure. And notice that pretty, whatever you'd call that. I forget what you call them now. But it's a pretty one and very intricate. Here the stove, center room with a bed, no heater. Here again, bed, table, bassinet. You wonder if these rooms were used. And you wonder if the shutters were decorated this way. You would think so. This is a very authentic place. Look at a pretty way of treating a door. Did the family itself paint this, or did they have a pro come in and do it? And here portraying an earthen floor, but wood inside there. Earthen floor with carpets, which you wouldn't have perhaps in a museum, would be quite acceptable, I would think. An outdoor kitchen, which would be good for safety reasons, and probably perhaps an oven, but I'm not sure, but that would probably have been an oven. This is an interesting conveyance, and perhaps used, as indicated here, to help put up a roof, or to maybe heighten the roof when it's sunk down, and then support it again with newer vertical beams. How clever. And this may have been one of those pounding devices for ore. Here, this is a plow. That may have been some kind of cedar. No, it sits in it's stationary, so I don't know what that would be. See there, a couple of pulleys, so some kind of, and that's not a very wide wheel, so something thin, string or something was on that. Sign from Sochevia, where I'll go, 1760. Now the irony of it is, these what look like milled logs or turned logs, couldn't have been in their day. Very much like what we would find in the States today. You might build a house just like this from a kit builder. Exactly what this fencing was for, what its purpose was, other than to make it difficult for people or animals to get in or out. I don't know. You can imagine this kind of layout of buildings in the American West, even in the American East in the early days. Doesn't seem strange to me at all. Walking through this entry, which would also have allowed for wagons to go through, you can also almost imagine that I'm here to visit some folks for some reason, and might even have some familiarity with how all of this is used. Notice that design for a well, for getting the water out. It's apparently serving as a barn. Maybe this first little room is like a tack room. Animals could be in this portion here. Gosh, look at that old wagon. Isn't that wonderful to see something like that still in existence? And I think that's a sleigh in the back. Remember, when we look at these little notches here where something's broken off, or that stained area there, was that caused by the people who lived here? Did a boy sit for some reason and dawdle right where my finger is with a stick or a dull knife? About that indentation, what caused that? Again, 19th century. The casement of the windows designed, I'm sure, to try to keep the heat in. Interesting is I don't see any chinking. I'm sure there must have been something. There's such spaces there. And this stuff, although that would change the design look, and you would think they would have incorporated that. But that may also be what they did over there, was to plaster the entire outside. And you can see the stylistic transition, as well as the transition in the use of materials, to thinner logs with the corners exposed, but with heavily plastered. Here we see the same thing. Again, an easy way to eliminate the drafting issue. And you could paint it. It was just a different style. That building up there may portray that concept before the finished work is done, or that could be made out of adobe kind of material. It has that look to it. I'm guessing that's actually what it is. It's of course a design that we see in forts on the frontier, the eastern frontier. Makes for a pretty fence, and you could keep almost anything out with that fence. Here a tool sharpening stone of the most primitive nature, and I bet you it worked. The man who fashioned that, thinking about it at night, getting the materials together. And notice how short the door. I'll stand next to it. So I'm standing next to it, and you can see my eye is right here. Of course, the stone we're entering on is a millstone. Imagine the effort it took to carve the top of that well. Here a cute little piece still from the 19th century. Notice how that reminds you of the haystacks that we see, and we'll see more of apparently in Romania. Here another great little wooden church. Ah, if these things could only speak. That art, whatever it is equal in stature or greater than the building itself. Would this have been the original entrance? Now this wonder truly is a you gotta be kidding me. It is a Ferris wheel. Before Ferris was even a glint in anyone's eye. This, no doubt, that the condition they recovered it in. Isn't that not that old, but what an imaginative idea. Now notice this is a different kind of coping. And you can see detail around the window. When that was new, it must have stood out more. This is a little 18th century house from Vaslui, however you pronounce that. Notice how it's being hauled out after being dismantled. Now this probably took place back in 1936 and somewhere in that period, believe it or not. Shooting the underside of this roof reminds me of my shooting the underside of the roofs of temples in the Forbidden City in Beijing and other temples, not only in China but in Thailand also. And notice those are just some kind of reed, hollow reeds, but probably good insulation as well as shirking the water. And of course we might imagine that their cars were quite modest also. And this windmill is interesting. I'm sure we're missing the fourth wing, if you will, but it almost looks, sitting on that round turret, as though it could be turned, but I'm not sure that I can see how that could have been done. This in fact is a wine press. Whether it's German Messendorf, sounds like it, 1864. That's apparently how it worked. And the screw would have been at the other end from where we're facing, I believe. And by undoing the screw, you lowered the weight of that tremendous beam. This was a 19th century device used for felting and cleaning wool. Again, the paddle wheel drives the spindle, or the axle, and then those little blocks of wood on the spindle cause whatever would have been in those vertical slots you see there to go up and down, causing the action that did the felting and the cleaning, whatever felting is. It's in a world where the sound of this, the look of this, is not strange at all. It's what you and your father have done for maybe decades. Maybe there was some more primitive way of doing it that your father did, and he regales you with all the work that was necessary to do it the old way. And whether this whole thing here came forward so that those devices would catch on this spindle or not, I'm not sure. I think so. There again, it looks like a wine press, or something that pressed other things even more so. That, of course, a grinding wheel. What was the purpose of all the rocks in the basket, though? Except that they're a counterweight to that screw. So if you could turn the screw, or the shaft that was in that hole you see there in the middle, and rotate that screw up. Of course, it's not going up because of all the weight here, but what it is going to do is suck down this end and compress whatever's up there. Is this some kind of just a purposeful curved trough? Did it serve a particular curved function? And now we got a nice view of an elegant version of this thing. That probably there was something here that was large and flat that went in that large flat area, hollowed out on that pile of logs, that would allow you to compress a whole bunch of grapes at one time. And then probably there's a hole somewhere that allowed the juice to drain out. And the one we've just seen, of course, is 1793. Was that the manufacturer's name, or was it a company that processed grapes that carved its name in there? Interesting. Whatever it's for. Doghouse? Or maybe just a place for either water trough or for grain for cattle. Or horses. Horses more likely, since those look like horses on the end. Looks like it was all embellished with drawings. Maybe they were colored in, although we just see the black outline. And the boats that might have been used on this river or lake, doubtful, but it's fascinating that boats of this age are still in existence, so we can see them. Were those holes filled with a cork or a knob that allowed you to drain the water out? Here I forget what you call that kind of caulking. That's a name for it. That one obviously caught fire. Notice how thin it is. The wall, I mean. Go take a look at it. You wonder what kind of wood. Certainly the man who crafted these, or crafted the great ones in this form, was a revered artist in his community, or craftsman. And the entry gate leading into this complex, with a pretty little building over the side, is in itself quite lovely and well carved. Again, some craftsman would have been known for his skill. Possible that this is really old, but it has stood in the various parts of town to be used by neighbors for chatting. You have to expect someone to come walking out. You see the different bare spots on the grass, and you just imagine that the place is being used. And this may be what I'll see later in the trip when I go to visit wooden churches. It kind of reminds me of what I saw. I think it's called White Lake or something like that. I can't remember now. The lake that I started my kayak trip on was a lake where the Klondikers built a community before they started their water trip down to Dawson. House, guessing before I get to the sign, it's probably a 20th century house. I think we can go up inside, so I shall. Various center rooms. Were they like an entry room that we would have? Particularly in Wyoming, where it's cold and blustery, so you go in and take your boots and jackets off there and then close the outer door and enter the inner. Imagine neighbors who come to visit for a while sitting on this bench, like wall to this deck. And the walls are all painted also. Just a view of the church from behind. Isn't that roof pretty? Before we enter into this complex, notice the richly carved entryway. Now, whether they've taken several entryways from various homes or complexes and placed them here, I don't really know. Although there is a similarity in design between these two, at least. You would imagine there were deep snows here, but look at the size of that wood. Maybe a corn crib there, you think? That's obvious. Look at these slabs of wood and imagine what it took. I don't know whether these are sawn. They appear to be sawn. Doesn't appear to be hand worked at all. Even this barn door frame has some embellishment. Maybe that's what you did in the wintertime. You developed that kind of a craft. So fortunate that these buildings have been saved. That was a brilliant plan. 18th century. As quaint and funky as we think these peasant clothes are, the reality is they were either Sunday best that we're seeing, or if they wore them during the as an everyday thing, they served a real practical function. Shedding rain, keeping warm. Here you can see butter churns. Probably a baby crib in an oven. You think that was an icon of the sun? These hooky things were, but they're for holding open the door once you got it open. Clever. Probably a way to feed cows. Here another grain storage device, but it hardly looks like it could keep the mice away from it, except because of the fine, tight weaving. And this next complex from Arad, and it's 18th century. No, it's not the 18th century, it's the 1700s. But here it's interesting because the style is that use of plaster, if not adobe. Interesting, colorful old wagons. And this is a little cart, hand cart used on the railroad, and it would be just like an exercise machine. You put your feet there, your hands, and you just work it back and forth. What we'll enter now is a household from the 1800s. It was a very remote, high mountain household in which the design of the house was the concept of a fortress, presumably from maybe the animals that existed, but perhaps there were brigands about. This completely, what appears to be completely fortress-like, wall-enclosed complex. Now you can see that it's just the individual house itself. But again, you get a sense of how it might have been like to live in this place. Animals over there, maybe hay and so forth stored over there. These buildings, a tack building, whatever. And that instrument there, who knows what that's for? Maybe feeding chickens. And this makes it more authentic also. So we'll go take a look inside. Again, these are small houses, modest, but large enough to perform the function they needed with the energy it took to build these and maintain them. Families were close. It wasn't like America where every kid needs his own bedroom for some bizarre reason. That would not have filled the average home, I doubt. Now what we don't know is whether it was a wealthy family by local standards that would own such a complex versus the majority. Or was it the norm, but very sparsely laid out? The entranceway certainly seems to suggest that the owner wants you to take notice and to realize that his entry is simply a reflection of all that's inside. And this is 1862. Notice how the walls of the home might be decorated. Makes sense. I think it's for hay, for haying, those combs, if you will, or large rakes. That's probably rare to find such implements remaining. That might be an outhouse. But not much different than barns that you've seen in the West. You'd use the implements and the materials at hand. In here it was interesting because there was suddenly the smell that I recall from the old antique furniture I used to buy and restore. And my guess it's this old wood floor and Just a wooden large at large. Now I wonder if they did have this in a loom like this, maybe in the winter time. You'd enter into the mud room like this. There a rack for all your clothing. Maybe upstairs was just stuff that was kept up there that didn't need to be downstairs, like potatoes and things like that. Here, your own little butter press. 3 more presses. Imagine the hours that those represent. Imagine what went on in the mind of the person who had to use those things. Maybe they did it while they were relaxing in the evening or during the day or something, when they were chatting around the fire in the wintertime. Who knows? Here an oven. This may have been just used, and it's covered, so it might have been something you could use in the winter, since it would have been warm enough perhaps with the oven going. And maybe they even ate in here. Fun to try to imagine. 1890 from the Maramuris, or however you pronounce it, where I'll be sometime in the next couple of weeks, I think. A big house, a big porch all the way around, big barn, rather simple, straightforward design. Again, 19th century. This lattice work on the second floor is interesting, suggesting that either protection from the elements was not critical, or whatever was inside benefited from exposure to weather that might waft through those openings. And this front suggests that that's how you could load things in. Hay would seem to fit fine up here, since it could breathe and might not be so prone to fire. Now here's a beautiful wagon, isn't it? Probably one of the prettiest I've seen of what might be an authentic ranch wagon. Imagine what it would have cost in its time compared to the simple version. Was this then owned by a wealthy person? Was this a form of self-aggrandizement? Or did everybody have one like this? Or did the family carve it itself, as did others? And not to leave out the birds or pigeons. An 1847 house from the village I'll be going to soon. Notice here the implements of a bakery and the oven. Interesting how the man or persons decided to add a porch covering, kind of like what I did for Alejandra's porch. Could this have possibly been a authentic gate? And if so, imagine the cleverness of figuring out the balance to get the rotation to be allowed. Apparently is another area. Don't know what it is, why it's closed off. Here's a nice well with a cover to it to protect it, both the water and to keep children out of it. There's a tree, a cherry tree I think, planted in 2009 by the Imperial Japanese. This is apparently a smaller reproduction of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, built by or as a tribute to the French. This pretty clock has the name of the city, of the park on it. The clock has the name of the park at the top, but it says 1459. Is it possible this could have been made then? I think this church is undergoing some considerable restoration, more so in the front. We'll go around there. I noticed this, but I do recall that I saw a great deal of this in the southern Balkans. Look at this detail on a back building. This tower is being reworked. See a big bell up there. Maybe there's more than one. And we'll just take a look at this.
Amen.